Hey, I'm Wright, and it really is a privilege on behalf of IBHS to present to you all as part of the Washington Climate Summit series. We're going to take a quick but really fundamental view at wildfire, and particularly the science that looks at where wildfire meets the built environment. All across the West, we're having these conversations that look at the why behind wildfire losses. We really are seeing a piece by which that wild urban interface, and it's a term that is not often used with precision, but that point where the built environment, the subdivisions, the homes then meet those wildlands. Well, we haven't paid enough attention to that. So there's really land use policies that have run awry. We're seeing larger fires, particularly in light of the climate trends that we're seeing with the intensity that can play out. And there's no longer just a single event that it plays out. It is not just a discrete season. We're seeing things that really extend beyond a broader period of time. So let's talk then about wildland and the fire behavior, because there's really three drivers that let us understand what drives ignition. The first is weather. We're particularly focused on weather for hot, dry, and windy days. We have an element related to topography, because those steep slopes can have an impact on the progression of that fire. And then there's fuel. Fuel that, yes, can be the fuel load in the forested or grassland areas, but also the structures themselves can become the fuel that propels the fire forward. At least from where we sit today in 2023, we're not going to change the weather in this season. We're not going to change the topography, but we can manage the fuels in the broader ecosystem and pay particular attention to the fuels that are compounding as we look at the elements of the built environment. So we see pieces come, and flame can bring wildfire to you, and we can see the elements related to the radiant heat pieces, where the structure next to you is an inferno, and it burns you down. So much of this is driven by wildfire embers. And a piece I'll come back to again here in a moment is this element, because this is a view inside our research facility as we are doing something we uniquely can do here, which is the ember generation that can attack a building. And as you see in this space, as it comes, there's a circular effect that can happen right as it hits the base of the structure. Well, as well, we want to be careful about the windows and the siding, and we do, but that bottom 6 inches, so many of the embers accumulate there, and then we can watch this kind of piece by which the spinning occurs. That ember deposition that plays out, right? These are the elements that inside our facility here, we have a unique ability to see and touch and understand so that we can bring forward some things that no one else does. When this research center was designed and created some 15 years ago, the property insurance industry made some donations and said, build this so that you can work as a 501c3 nonprofit to fill the gaps, to answer some questions so that we can understand those losses and particularly collaborate with the public to drive down that kind of loss. It's a pretty extraordinary facility we have here. I'll take you on a quick tour of this. Here we watch these pieces. We do a lot of work on the characteristics of how fires attack structures, and once they're in, how that can begin to move, the kind of progression that happens. Wind-driven flame spread across this element, a project we did with the U.S. Forest Service. Obviously, embers attacking buildings, and a lot of variations on what it means to experience that the embers, they just keep coming and they keep coming, and you watch the ignition pieces that play, the defensible space elements in terms of what happens when landscaping close to the house is there. We collect not just visual data, but a lot of specific data on heat transfer and flame length and the elements that play there as we understand how far structures need to be separated from one another, what plays under a deck, and how those spread dimensions can play. Here you see a duplex side by side. The one on the right was built in a way that really defended against wildfire. The one on the left, more conventional. They're both being hit with embers, the same embers at 12 miles an hour. It took about 7 minutes worth of ember showers to get the initial ignition on this side of the duplex. And within 1 minute, that entire side was enveloped and laid us in this space. But our work is not just about what plays out in here at the research center. It's also about the field. And so we look at windows in a side-by-side kind of way, the field and the lab. We look at defensible space elements in the field and in the lab. We look at elements of the fences that are right up next to the house in the field and in the lab. We look at things like the air vents that are in place, again, in the field, in the lab, to be credible and ultimately to put out the science, to show how this system hangs together. We've got to bring together both elements of the science to understand the real world pieces that we see, particularly with after fire investigations, and the kinds of things that we can do in our controlled environment where everything we do is at full scale. And so we've published a set of pieces that are here that are available to you all, whether it is work related to what happened right after the fires in California in 2017 and 18, work on codes that are in place that are really so important, some of the testing methods with ASTM. And this piece is related to what we call our suburban wildfire adaptation roadmaps. You just wanted to pick up one of these publications. I tell you, download that Suburban Wildfire Adaptation Roadmap because it shows how all the pieces related to the suburban fire that ultimately can lead to not just initial ignition, but conflagration, how you bring all of those science elements together in terms of what is good, what is better, and what is best. It culminates in a program that we have done to identify what are the first order pieces that need to take place. If you have to take a suite of elements, wildfire is different than some of the other perils we work with. And that if this baseline things are not all done, then one particular item is not going to have an effect in truly diminishing the propensity towards loss. And so 3 kind of categories here at the base of wildfire prepared home. Roof. You need to have a Class A rated roof. And the real good news for folks is that the vast majority of folks have this, whether it's asphalt shingle, metal, tile. Yes, things like cedar shake shingles are out of bounds here. But we need to have a fire rated roof at a Class A. And we need to make sure that we've cleared the debris, both in gutters, downspouts, as well as there in the valleys of the roof. Secondly, I turn to building features. Those attic and undercrawl vents need to have a wire mesh in place that ensures that we're not going to see embers come inside. And then I showed you right out of the gate, that bottom 6 inches right there needs to be non-combustible. We, under the base program for Wildfire Prepared, will allow a whole array of siding materials, but that bottom 6 inches has to be vertically non-combustible. Many people can get to those dimensions, but the real critical element, the holy grail, is this defensible space. And we think about defensible space in kind of 3 levels. The 5 feet closest to the house, then 5 to 30, and 30 to 100. Those last 2, there's been quite a bit of work on what does it mean to manage the fuel loads in 30 to 100, and 5 to 30, we want that to be lean and green. But the 5 feet closest to the home, the 5 feet closest to the structure, needs to be entirely non-combustible, removed branches that overhang, other kinds of landscaping in that place needs to be entirely brought back at least 5 feet, and then we need to be able to maintain it. Collectively, that is the wildfire prepared home, And because you always want to make sure you have assurance, the way it's set up here at IBHS, an inspector comes out and verifies these elements with the homeowner and provides them a certificate. When these pieces are all met, you can then turn to what we call the plus level. And we do care about back-to-back siding and windows and eaves and different kinds of decking materials and covering the gutters and moving those outbuildings even farther away. But those actions have effect. They add their value once all the fundamental pieces are there. And so many homeowners can only just meet the elements there shown in brown that are the base elements, but some really lean forward into that broader space. So how does this work, right? So these kind of elements are things we can do at a retrofit level. I think an important way is to make sure that we're not making it any worse. And so we've been doing some work in terms of what does it cost at the point of new construction to meet these pieces. And so California has something in their building called Chapter 7A. We outline a few things that go beyond that. And in California, if you wanted to go above 7A to meet these things to truly make your home defendable against wildfire, it adds $3,000 to the cost. Not free, but an increment that is absolutely achievable. But I'll broaden it up. Let's go to Montana, where we did this study and we looked at these kind of typical construction versus the fire-resistant home. It was about material choices. The point of new construction, it was negligible in terms of its cost. So as you think about this in the state of Washington, I look across these two domains. You have some context in more suburban areas that would have some of those California flares to it. You have some more broader areas and rural contexts and more open suburban contexts that would resemble those Montana elements. I really think there's opportunities in that space to close the gap. Retrofits, using wildfire prepared home, and building codes in terms of new construction. It is important because while we always hope that we'll be able to deploy the suppression resources to put out the fire, once that fire begins to move beyond 10 acres and begins to move into the built environment, we know that once ignited, there's a 90% chance of complete loss. Because the only way to stop it is if the fire suppression resources can get there. And so maybe even more so than some of the other things we do in the construction world, the work we do in this space requires us to do it planfully on the way in. Much of that can be done by the homeowner, but the greatest effect is when the community takes it on. One of the examples we have is in Paradise, California. Many folks know Paradise because of the campfire that played out in 2018. As they have gone to rebuild, they have incorporated these elements into their requirements. You can see the defensible space elements that are in place in this brand new build series of homes that are here right on the east side of Paradise. The town leaders leaned forward and adopted these pieces into their building code, knowing that when they did this, they made sure that going forward, they were building homes that were less likely to be lost to wildfire, that when embers came and showered into their communities, they could limit the effect of that. You can't stop all these ignitions, but we can narrow the path of damage, and that narrowing requires very specific action in terms of how to manage the fuel loads in the broader ecosystem, the kind of collective action that can only happen at a neighborhood and community scale. And then it's house by house, ensuring that those parcels are prepared, that they have roofs that are not going to ignite, they have the right building features, and they're absolutely laser focused on the elements of defensible space, particularly those elements 5 feet closest to the house. As you guys take this on in your climate summit and you look at how is Washington going to be able to withstand, survive, and even have communities that thrive amid a changing climate, it's going to take actions like this.